In this video, we're going to be taking a look at IG-88 for the Vintage Saga collection. So this arguably might be the best 3 3/4 inch action figure that Hasbro has ever made. To date, I think it is actually the most articulated figure they've ever made. It has 26 points of articulation even. And at this time, it had articulation that we've never seen on an action figure before, at least for Hasbro Star Wars, that is. And IG-88 is an essential action figure that we need in the vintage collection at some point. But quite frankly, if Hasbro just did a straight repack of this figure, I don't think too many people will be too upset by it. We do have, I mean, quite frankly, what more can they really update with this action figure? We do have IG-11 here, which I did review on the channel previously. And, I mean, I really don't think there's a whole lot that IG-88 can be upgraded with. The only thing I could really think of is maybe if they redid the paint deco on him and made him a much more darker color, more aligned with IG-11 here. But other than that, there's really nothing tooling wise that really needs to be updated. Has a lot of nice accessories. It's just a standout action figure from back in early 2007. So the Vintage Saga collection, I don't think I've talked about it too much on this channel up to this point, but it was kind of like a subline released during the Saga collection, and even technically going into the 30th anniversary collection. And I think it was around 12 action figures, and this was kind of like the second part, I guess. You had the VOTC line back in 2004, which basically gave us all the main characters in vintage style packaging. And then 2 years later, Hasbro brought that back again, and this time we got characters like IG-88 here. We got Bosk, who I consider that Bosk to still be the definitive version of him. And there was like X-Wing Luke and Bespin Luke and the Snowtrooper, which that Snowtrooper sculpt is still used today. And even as of time of this video, it's still considered the definitive Snowtrooper sculpt. I know a lot of people want that one updated, but it is considered the best one we have today, even 18 years later. Or, yeah, about 18 years later. There was also Greedo, the indoor Han Solo with the trench coat, which I do have that one reviewed on the channel from the vintage collection. And there was a few other, there was like Hoth Han Solo. But anyways, many of those are still considered the definitive versions of the respective characters. And I think that's the same case with IG-88 here. So how I acquired this, I actually got him all the way back in 2007 when he was originally released. I think I got him at Walmart at the time, if I recall correctly. I knew when I saw this guy on the shelves, I was like, I gotta have him for my collection. I've always been a big fan of the Empire Strikes Back bounty hunters, and IG-88, besides maybe Boba Fett, might be my favorite of the bunch there. He's just a very deadly assassin droid. And one interesting detail I'm glad they included with this is his blade back here, which I can imagine him doing some very torturous things to people with that. But he's just a very cool looking droid, and he has a very interesting backstory. From my understanding, he was just like a protocol droid that had somehow his programming changed on him, and then he becomes this deadly assassin droid. It's a very interesting story. Of course, now it might have changed over the years because of Disney taking over, but I know that was basically the established story for many years. So he's been a part of my collection for 18 years now at this point, 17, 18 years now, so I cherish him greatly. He's been with me for all these years and has been through a lot, and he's still in great shape and all his original accessories, and I'm glad he's been a part of my collection all these years up to this point, and I hope there's many, many more years to come with him. So unfortunately, I don't have the package here to show you, but if you know what the Kenner style IG-88 package looks like, it's the exact same thing. I do recall these, they did do these vintage Saga collection figures in a plastic shell at the time. So that was a nice thing for Hasbro to include to give a little more value for the money there. But yeah, that's pretty much all there is for the background of IG-88 here. So now let's just look at this guy a little closer. So if you didn't know anything about this guy, you probably would have a hard time deciphering this being a 2006 action figure or a 2007 one. He was definitely the best of the best at that time, and even to this day, arguably still the best of the best. So he's very tall, very wooden in his stature, I guess. Straight like a board. Lots of nice detailing on him. You can see all his intricate parts. Put that to the side for now. See what goes into the engineering of his droid. I would assume these are supposed to be like his eyes here. It's all these red buttons and flashes sticking out on him. Some wiring here and there, mainly attached to his legs, and some in his abdomen there. Have his basically his pinchers there, I guess. Of course, his bandolier, which it is removable. It's very loose. I don't think it well, yeah, you can't plug it in his back right there. Kind of see the plug there. Never really been able to get that in its spot though. But it's not really necessary because it's not going to fall off on you. But you could take that off if you wanted to. Despite him being a very intricate and detailed action figure, he is kind of fragile though. You have to be a little careful with him. One problem I've had with him ever since the beginning is it's either his right leg here or his left leg. It just keeps wanting to pop out on me. So I don't really pose it very much because of that. Just one thing to be wary of. Kind of sensitive with him. And his feet here, which almost looks like the shape of a mouse droid even. So the big part about him, let's go over the articulation since at the time this was probably his highest selling point. Okay, so he's got articulation basically where his eyes are in the midsection of his head. Some of the parts for me don't articulate very well, and it's always been a problem ever since I initially got him. And I don't want to bend the parts too much because I don't want to risk anything snapping off. But we'll try and go through as best we can. So the midsection of his head is articulated, then at the base of his neck is articulated. His shoulders are articulated, which I've always had a problem trying to get those to bend. It almost feels like his arms want to snap off. That might be just my sample though, because I have seen other people and it doesn't seem like it's that big of a deal. We'll just take this off for now. So he does have a swivel at the end of his shoulder here, which is something even today we don't see on any of the Star Wars action figures. In fact, I can't think of any over the last 18 years that had anything like that. So that's something very unique for him. I wouldn't mind Hasbro trying to incorporate that into action figures, but then that might have another cut in the character's arm that a lot of people would say aesthetically is not very good looking. I don't even know if, well, yeah, IG-11 here kind of has that. Then he does have a hinge at his shoulder there. And it's just a hinge, but because you can rotate the base of his shoulder around, you can get that to rotate as well. No wrist articulation, which is not really that big of a deal. He does have a joint at the torso there, or in his abdomen. And let's see if I could try and get him to look down a little bit. Well, maybe not. Though I can get the raised back a little bit. And you can see some of these parts want to pop out on him. But anyway, he does have a joint right there. Just something to work with. What else is there? And he does have a swivel at the base of just a little bit above his hips there. Right in through there. And then he does have swivel hips. And then he does have a swivel thigh. Which, how many years later did it take for it to become a standard part of a Hasbro Star Wars action figure? Maybe almost 15 years later? Well, maybe, yeah, about 14 or 15 years later, before that became kind of a standard thing. Between 2006 and 2015 or 16, it started becoming more normalized after 2015 during the Black Series 3 3/4 inch line. And I don't think Hasbro has really gone full in on it until after the return of the TVC line. So yeah, probably about 10, 11 years later actually. So the swivel thigh. And he does have a hinge at the knee here, which it can bend either way. Want to be careful though, because he does have those wires sticking out there. You don't want to risk breaking those. But then he does have a swivel at his ankle there. Ah, yes. This is the leg that I've had a lot of problems wanting to pop out on me. It's just never wanted to stay in place very well. But yeah, very fragile action figure. Yes, he's super articulated all around and arguably the most articulated action figure ever made. But a lot of those parts are very fragile, so I would recommend being careful. I know everyone's had a little bit different experience. It might be just my sample. But still, something to be wary of. So for his accessories, he pretty much comes with everything he needs. So he has his rifle here, which has a... Between his E11 and his rifle here, they have a very interesting carbon design on them. It's like silver paint. I would say they're kind of carbonized, basically. But it's something unique on IG-88's rifles that I haven't seen on any other ones before, especially this E11. So if you throw this E11 into a group of them, you should be able to point out which one is IG-88 specifically. This is a nice rifle. He can hold it in a shooting pose like how you saw at the beginning of the video, or you can have him hold it like this, which I think is kind of how we see him in the movie. So then the E11, same thing we've gotten so many times before at this time, just with a different paint scheme. And he can hold it in his other hand here. Kind of how he is in the movie. Then he does have this blade here, which is a nice accessory. And he can hold that in his hands as well. Then it also attaches to the back of his bandolier here. It stays in the place pretty good. As you can see, you can take the E11 and put it in the holster right there in his back, but it doesn't fit very well. It can only go maybe about a quarter of the way in, and it does stick out on the side there, as you can see at the beginning of the video. So it will stay into place, but it doesn't really slot in very well, I guess. Yeah, he just looks really good. I wish he wasn't so fragile though, so you can articulate him a little bit more. But I know, especially at the torso here, he can go completely 90 degrees and look all the way down and then look all the way back as well. But those joints are just so tight for my figure that it's very hard to move those around, and I don't want to risk any of the parts snapping off. Especially at this point. Perhaps I'll get another one at some point. But he's kind of an expensive action figure on the aftermarket now. There is one that came out a couple years before this, and I think it's a little bit less articulated, but maybe I'll get that at some point. Not mind adding some different variations of IG-88 in the collection. But since then, other than the Black Series figure, he hasn't been revisited in 3 3/4 inch scale since. A lot of these wires here, I'm sure you've kind of seen already, but you can pop most of them out. Let's see here. Like right there. And I'm sure they did that so you can articulate him a little bit more. Not risk breaking any of the parts. But yeah, overall, it's a very nice action figure. In fact, I think in some ways this IG-11 doesn't even rate compared to IG-88 here. There are some things I do like about the IG-11 better, mainly that the joints are much more fluid and it doesn't feel like they're going to break on you. But at the same time, he is much more skinny, and that can be a blessing or a curse depending how Hasbro does it. But the parts don't feel quite as durable as other than at the joints, of course, but just the normal parts by themselves. I think IG-88 feels a little bit more durable in that regard, and he looks a little bit more robust as well. I'll bring out the Black Series figure of him, which will be getting reviewed next. And one thing we know about the Black Series IG-88 is that he was a lot smaller than he probably should have been and much more fragile. And I think that kind of went in with the IG-11 here. Still, they're all very nice action figures. I'm happy to have them all. But anyways, I think that's all I can really tell you about IG-88 from the Vintage Saga collection here. So would I recommend him for your collection? I totally would. He is kind of an expensive action figure. I'm not sure exactly what the going rates are. I know he's at least $50 plus usually these days, which I guess in the Star Wars action figure world, that's not the worst. But definitely if you're on a budget, you would have to pay a little bit more than you're probably comfortable with. There are alternatives to IG-88. There is one that came out previously, like I said, a couple years before this one. I think he might be a little bit less articulated though, but if you're just going for the aesthetic look to him, he might be good enough. And I think the price for him is typically not that bad, maybe in the $20 range at most. I think that may have been the Saga line around 2002 or 3, somewhere in that range. But he's just a nice action figure, and even to today's standards, he would fit in easily with the modern TVC line. And I think a lot of people would be okay if Hasbro did just a straight repack of him. There's really not a whole lot that needs to be updated with him. The only thing I would suggest is if they made the articulation points a little bit more durable and a little bit more smooth, so you can actually articulate everything, and just make sure all his parts are tight and there's not any risk of anything breaking, or at least minimize that risk. and then a new paint deco where he's a little bit darker. Other than that, I think he's a perfect action figure. The tooling's there. There's no reason he can't be re-released, and I don't think a lot of people would be too upset if they did that. But he's been in my collection for 18 years, 17, 18 years now at this point. Very happy that he's been part of my collection all these years, and I hope there's many more to come. But anyways, that concludes this review. I hope you enjoyed it. Stay tuned for plenty more reviews in the future. There will always be more to come. If you haven't already, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. I always appreciate all your support. And check out some of the links in the description if you haven't done so already. As always, thanks for watching.